Беларусь на весь мир на 9 языках. Круглосуточно. Онлайн. FM. Спутник. Международное радио Беларусь. Для тех, кто далеко, но с нами.
Mr. Pregerman, the problems Europe would face after the possible collapse of intermediate-range nuclear forces treaty are widely discussed at different conferences and events. What is the specific of Minsk dialogues platform in this regard?
Well, I think we, of course, will try to add to the discussions which are already ongoing, and I would argue that the discussions we have at the moment are not enough, because what you find at different conferences and different forums is that like-minded people gather together and discuss not the problem as such, but rather ways of strengthening their own security against another side. And then the other side is not represented during those discussions. So the absolute added value of the Minsk Dialogue platform is that we do get all those opposing sides together, and pretty much this is the only place today where those sides can sit down together and talk to each other rather than about each other and behind each other's back. So I think this is really important in today's environment. But also, I think what will add an additional interesting aspect to all these discussions is that, as you know, nearly a month ago, the Belarusian president announced that Belarus, being one of the signatories to the INF Treaty, is not going to leave its obligations, provided that the other sides do not target us with their own missiles and do not pose any direct threat to our security. And this is crucially important because, unlike other discussions where we simply call on the international community to be more reasonable, to avoid any moves which will further escalate the tensions in the region, here Belarus makes a specific step towards this very aim of providing better security in Eastern Europe. And I think it does provide some stimuli for the other countries in the region to behave in the similar way. Because if this centrally located country called Belarus says that it's not going to produce or use any of those missiles, it means that there is no much of rationale for the others, to go beyond those limitations which had been posed by the INF Treaty. And in this respect, I think, first of all, it will be important for the Belarusian authorities and President personally to go a little bit deeper into this offer by the Belarusian side and explain it a bit deeper, but also to, try to hear the feedback from the other sides. And I think this is going to be a good ground for some more specific discussions.
But we have received positive signals from the United States and the Russian Federation that the sides are not going to deploy missiles in Europe.
Well, so far so good, as we might say, but we've just spent less than a month after or since the United States left the treaty, and we also heard that the United States already tested a missile which was previously against the INF Treaty. So, of course, for the time being, it's really promising that the two main signatories or former signatories to the INF Treaty declared that they are not going to sort of implement all those things. But you never know. The situation is so dynamic that tomorrow might be completely different from today. And then it's just important that besides those two bigger former signatories, there is a country, or better, a number of countries in this part of the world, which will make sure that even if those two make some steps and raise the stakes, then we can somehow make sure that this does not lead to a crisis.
The situation in the region is definitely depend on the role of global players, on their relations. And as we now witness the tensions between Russia and China, between China and the United States, what impact could it have on the situation in the region, and what are their most challenging factors for security reasons?
Eastern Europe is specific in a way because geographically, if we just look at the map, it is relatively small. But when we analyze the geopolitical trends which affect the state of things in this part of the world, then we see that all those global tensions and global trends, they impact directly and quickly the atmosphere and the feelings in this part of the world. In this respect, we might really say that this is a kind of a heartland of international politics. And as you know, Zbigniew Brzezinski at some point wrote about the Eurasian chessboard, where he said that those who control Eurasia control the world, and those who control Eastern Europe, I'm changing the words a little bit, but the idea was this: who controls Eastern Europe will have a huge possibility and a huge benefits over the other geopolitical competitors. This, of course, makes the region very vulnerable to all this geopolitical tension, but it also creates some additional possibilities. And it's just important that wise and talented and trained statesmen and diplomats can make full use of this opportunity to the benefit of security rather than to the benefit of some conflicting interests, which might in the end lead to, well, not only a crisis, but a tragedy.
As we are going to talk about Belarus-US relations, we have seen the visits of high-ranking US officials to Belarus, and could we take it as a positive signal for normalizing the relations, or it was just an attempt to monitor the situation and to make some kind of thinking where to move further?
Well, I think it was both. And on the one hand, it is a natural result of this slow process which has been taking place roughly since 2012, when the two sides, meaning Minsk and Washington, decided that all those differences they had should be sort of left a little bit aside, and Minsk and Washington should focus on very small but very pragmatic things of mutual interest and try to use those small steps to move towards some bigger goals in the future. And roughly 6 years have passed, and it is now very natural that we have an increasing number of high-level visits. But having said that, on the other side, it's very obvious that especially the former National Security Advisor John Bolton came here on an exploratory mission, if I might say. And Minsk was not the only destination of his trip. He first went to Kyiv, then to Chisinau, and finally came to Minsk, and then also ended up in Warsaw. And of course, when you have a situation of in the relations when for a quarter of a century, no really high-ranking American official, especially the security official, has been in this country, then you cannot expect anything more. You need to start exchanging visits and exchanging views during those visits, and this is the only way to move this relationship forward.
And what are the key topics you are going to discuss at the forum?
The forum is generally focused on East European security, and we declared that last year when the inaugural forum took place. This year, the title is a little bit broader because we're going to talk about European security, but this is not because we're somehow trying to get out of the original focus. It's more to emphasize that security in this region is very much dependent on all European security, and vice versa is also correct. What's going on in this part of the world will automatically affect the security atmosphere in broader Europe and even Eurasia. And especially this is evidence after the collapse of the INF Treaty. So this is what we wanted to emphasize. But we'll still be focused on processes and trends in Eastern Europe. And we're trying to apply this broad definition of security. Traditionally, we know hard security was and still is at the core of this discussion. All sorts of military experts discuss weaponry, armies, and all that stuff. And of course, we're going to continue that. There will be a few discussions focused specifically on hard security, on arms control and strategic stability, on possibilities to reduce military risk as a result of some unintended consequences, which might potentially lead to crises in the region. So this will be one big part of the discussions. But then, as I said, we're trying to go beyond hard security only. We will talk, and I think it's going to be quite innovative, about journalism at times of information warfare and propaganda and counter-propaganda. And we have invited quite a few well-known and outstanding names from among media communities in Russia, in Europe, in the United States. We're also going to talk a little bit about economic security and try to see how various economic projects and region building projects, namely the Eurasian Economic Union, the European Union, and now the Belt and Road Initiative, can work together rather than conflict, which unfortunately has been the case in recent years. We will also talk about some specific problems like what is going on in Donbass and whether the latest developments in Ukrainian politics can open up some new opportunities in, well, perhaps not resolving the conflict fully, but at least making sure that it becomes irreversible in terms of some worst-case scenarios. We will also talk about Central Asia. This is going to be an interesting addition to our original discussion. But again, we want some comparative perspectives, and we think what's going on in Central Asia, given that it's also sort of an area of geopolitical conflict or competition, better put, competition between China, Russia, Iran, the United States, a little bit of European presence there. So we'll try to compare some challenges facing us. And also, I think it is important, we have asked representatives of 3 key security organizations operating in on our continent to present their own perspectives on the causes of the situation we have found ourselves in, and also possible ways out. So those organizations are OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, NATO, and CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization. And I think this is going to be an exciting exchange of opinions.
Leading experts and influential politicians would probably have a very fruitful and vivid discussions, but what impact could it have on the decision makers?
Another added value of this forum, or at least we're trying to make it an added value, is that it sort of unites experts and decision makers. That's why we're saying this is Track 1.5 conference. Because when we started, like 5-6 years ago, we declared that we wanted to work among experts. And, in the diplomatic language, this is called Track 2. And then Track 1 is the official level where diplomats and statesmen talk to themselves. But now, 5-6 years later, we're in a situation where our events attract a lot of attention on the part of officials. So this is going to be a really good and productive mixture of experts, academics, and acting officials. And this is one way to make sure that the two sides hear each other, because it's not only that politicians sometimes do not hear experts, but the opposite also true. And sometimes when you listen to what experts or academics write or say, it looks more like a fantasy or a fairy tale rather than something which can be implemented in real politics. So this is important that the two sides get a little bit closer onto the ground and try to hear one another, and also try to produce something which is of mutual benefit. But also, after the discussion, we're going to produce a non-paper, which will be a collection of the most important ideas, opinions, suggestions, recommendations expressed during the forum, and we'll do our best to make sure that the non-paper will be disseminated among the key decision makers, not, of course, only in this part of the world, because this part of the world, as we already said, is very much dependent on global trends and relations between global powers. So we'll be disseminating that everywhere in the world where we go and where our partners are present. And I should also notice that this year we have 28 partners from quite a few countries: the United States, Germany, Austria, France, Russia, Turkey, Georgia. And that is not only a sign that what we are doing is important beyond our own borders, but it's also a possibility, an opportunity we want to use. We want to use it to, as I said, promote the results of this forum and try to make sure that the work we are doing is not just something which happens and then no one ever hears about it.
And Belarus will prove again its renommé or its role as a platform for the dialogue. Well,
that's some kind of a special situation we are in at this point in history. And on the one hand, it's obvious that this is our own interest to make sure that we're the platform for dialogue, for negotiations, rather than some battlefield. Unfortunately, we've experienced it throughout our history that whenever the bigger powers fight between themselves, then unfortunately smaller states which sit in between, and Belarus has been that territory or state in between, they become the first and the ultimate victims. It's enough to look at the statistics of losses during World War II to see that there was a horrible tragedy for everyone, but then for a country like Belarus, that was just exceptionally horrible. So this is our own interest, but also we are unexpectedly, Belarus has found itself in a very unusual position. We're allies of Russia, and we are members of the CSTO. We are also in a bilateral union state where we have some security and defense commitments to each other. But at the same time, we do have bilateral agreements with all our other neighbors, including NATO member states, on confidence and security building measures. No other state in this part of the world has all that. And if we manage to convert this into a broader negotiation process, or not even a negotiation process, but in a process which will lead to creating a zone of heightened security measures in the region, this will be a huge contribution to regional security, which even at this point in time, some experts don't realize this huge potential. And I think what we are trying to do with this forum is just to help these things happen, to help work to the benefit of our own security, but also to the security of the region. And in this respect, I have quite some optimism about our work.
So thank you very much for coming. It was a real
Thanks.
pleasure to see you here.